Waiter laughs at old man's cheap order. Regrets it when he learns who he is. Have you ever laughed at someone, only to find out later that they were someone you should have respected all along? We often make the mistake of judging people by appearances, forgetting that there's more to a person than meets the eye. This is the story of a young waiter who mocked an elderly man for ordering something simple and inexpensive, only to regret it when he learned who the old man really was. What happens next will leave you questioning your own assumptions and thinking twice before you judge others. The restaurant was busy, as it usually was on a Friday night. The clink of silverware and the hum of conversation filled the air. Waiters moved quickly between tables, carrying platters of food and drinks, while the scent of grilled steak and fresh bread wafted through the air. It was a high-end restaurant, known for its elegant decor and gourmet dishes. The clientele was always sophisticated, with well-dressed individuals and couples dining in luxurious surroundings. In the midst of all the opulence, there was one waiter who stood out. His name was Tom, a young man in his mid-20s, eager to make a name for himself in the restaurant business. Tom had always dreamed of working in fine dining, and now that he had finally secured a job at one of the best places in town, he was determined to impress. But there was one problem: Tom often let his pride and arrogance get the best of him. He judged people based on their appearance and assumed that those who didn't order the most expensive items were somehow less important. His eyes would occasionally scan the room, looking for customers who looked rich or powerful, and he treated them with a little extra attention, always trying to win favor with those who he thought could help him climb the social ladder. That evening, as Tom made his rounds, he spotted an elderly man sitting alone at a table near the window. The man was dressed simply in a faded coat and a pair of scuffed shoes. His hair was thin and gray, and his hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the menu. At first glance, he seemed like just another old man, someone who probably didn't have much money to spend. Tom's mind quickly formed an assumption. This man wouldn't be ordering anything fancy. And sure enough, when the elderly man made his order, it confirmed Tom's guess. The man requested a simple soup and a small side of bread, nothing extravagant, nothing expensive, a meal that, to Tom, seemed unworthy of the fine restaurant they were in. Tom couldn't help but smirk as he took the order. He barely concealed his amusement. As he turned to leave, he muttered under his breath, "Well, that's a surprise. A man like that doesn't even know how to enjoy fine dining." He didn't think much of it, convinced that he had the whole situation figured out. As Tom continued serving the other tables, he couldn't shake the feeling that the elderly man wasn't quite who he appeared to be. The man seemed so out of place in the luxurious restaurant, hunched over his small meal in contrast to the well-dressed patrons around him. Tom dismissed it, telling himself that the man probably just didn't know any better. It wasn't uncommon for people to feel uncomfortable in such upscale settings, and the old man probably didn't have the means to afford anything more than the cheapest option on the menu. Later, as Tom passed by the elderly man's table, he overheard a conversation between the man and the manager. The manager, a middle-aged man named John, was speaking to the old man in a tone that seemed unusually respectful. "Mr. Hamilton, we're so glad you could join us tonight," John said, his voice full of warmth and admiration. "I trust everything is to your liking." The elderly man smiled gently, nodding. "Yes, everything's perfect, thank you," he replied in a soft, kind voice. Tom's ears perked up at the mention of Mr. Hamilton. The name didn't sound familiar to him, but the way the manager was speaking made it clear that the elderly man was someone important. Curiosity began to stir within Tom, and he couldn't help but wonder who this man really was. As the evening wore on, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that he had misjudged the elderly man. He had laughed at him in his head, assuming he was just another poor soul who didn't belong in the restaurant. But now, with the manager's respectful tone and the mention of the name Mr. Hamilton, Tom started to feel uneasy. He decided to ask around. "Hey, do you guys know who the old man at table 8 is?" Tom asked one of the other waiters during a break. The other waiter, a seasoned veteran named Sarah, raised an eyebrow. "You don't know who Mr. Hamilton is?" she asked, surprised. Tom shook his head. "No, should I?" Sarah's eyes widened. "You really don't know. He's one of the wealthiest men in the city, owns half the properties downtown, has invested in countless companies, and is a major philanthropist. He's also a war hero and a well-respected figure in the community. His family's legacy is legendary. Tom's stomach sank. He couldn't believe it. The man he had mocked for ordering a simple meal was not just some old man. He was an incredibly influential figure, someone whose presence commanded respect. "Wait," Tom stammered. "He's really that important?" Sarah nodded, her voice serious. "You'd better watch your step, Tom. Mr. Hamilton isn't someone you want to disrespect. He's a man who's done more for this city than most of us could ever imagine." Tom felt his face flush with embarrassment. He had judged Mr. Hamilton based on nothing more than his appearance and his modest order, completely unaware of the man's true identity. His thoughts raced as he replayed the moment he had mocked the elderly man, calling him out in his head for not ordering a more extravagant meal. The shame was overwhelming. As Tom stood there, his mind swirling with regret, he saw the elderly man rise from his table. Mr. Hamilton made his way to the front of the restaurant, where he paused to speak with the manager one last time. Tom hesitated, but something pushed him forward. He needed to apologize. Swallowing his pride, Tom walked over to the elderly man. His heart raced in his chest as he approached Mr. Hamilton, who was still standing by the door. "Mr. Hamilton," Tom began, his voice shaky, "I just wanted to apologize for my behavior earlier. I didn't realize who you were, and I mocked your order, and that was wrong of me. I'm sorry." Mr. Hamilton turned to him, a soft smile playing on his lips. He placed a hand on Tom's shoulder and looked at him kindly. "It's all right, young man. We all make mistakes. The important thing is to learn from them." Tom's eyes widened with surprise. He had expected anger or disappointment, but instead, Mr. Hamilton showed nothing but grace. His reaction stunned Tom, and at that moment he realized just how wrong he had been. The next day, Tom couldn't stop thinking about Mr. Hamilton and the way he had handled the situation with such dignity. Tom knew he had learned an important lesson that would stick with him for the rest of his life. He had made assumptions based on outward appearances, and in doing so, he had missed the opportunity to show respect to someone who truly deserved it. As weeks went by, Tom found himself treating everyone he met with more kindness and respect, regardless of their appearance or social status. He had learned the hard way that people are often far more than they seem at first glance, and that kindness and humility are always the best approach. Mr. Hamilton, on the other hand, continued to frequent the restaurant, though he never mentioned Tom's apology. He simply greeted the young waiter with the same warmth he had always shown, as if nothing had happened. But for Tom, the lesson had been unforgettable, and every time he served someone in the future, he would remember the humble man who had taught him the true meaning of respect. This story is a reminder that we should never judge a person by their outward appearance or make assumptions based on superficial traits. You never know who someone truly is or what they've accomplished. The elderly man you mock might be a war hero, a philanthropist, or someone whose life story would inspire you in ways you never expected. Always treat others with kindness and respect, because you never know when you might meet someone who is far more extraordinary than you could imagine.